The flames had already consumed half of the barn when Julia Vaughn realized she would lose everything she had ever known. And in that moment of absolute devastation, she did not cry but instead stood frozen, watching 28 years of memories turn to ash against the Colorado sky. It was late September of 1882, and Central City had been experiencing one of the driest seasons anyone could remember. The fire started in the late afternoon, perhaps from a lamp knocked over by one of the horses, though Julia would never know for certain. She had been in town purchasing supplies when she saw the smoke rising from the direction of her property, black and thick against the golden hillside. By the time she rode back, neighbors had already formed a bucket brigade from the creek, but the flames were too fierce, too hungry. Her small farmhouse, the barn, the chicken coop, even the old oak tree where her father had built her a swing when she was 6 years old, all of it burned. Julia stood on the dirt road leading to what used to be her home, her hands gripping the reins of her mare so tightly her knuckles turned white. The heat from the fire made the air shimmer and dance, and she could hear the cracking and popping of wood giving way to the inferno. Men shouted instructions to one another, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, but their voices seemed distant, as though she were underwater. Everything she owned, every photograph of her parents who had died 3 years prior from influenza, every quilt her mother had sewn, every letter her father had written to her mother during their courtship, all of it was being devoured by flames that cared nothing for sentiment or loss. Someone touched her shoulder and she flinched. It was Martha Henderson, one of the women from town, her round face creased with concern. "Come away, dear," Martha said gently. "There is nothing more to be done here. You can stay with us tonight." Julia shook her head, unable to form words. She could not look away from the fire. This land had been in her family since 1859, when her father had staked his claim during the gold rush. He had built the house himself, board by board, and her mother had planted the garden that Julia still tended. Now it was all disappearing, transforming into smoke and embers that floated up into the darkening sky like malevolent fireflies. As the sun set, and the fire finally began to exhaust itself, having nothing left to consume, Julia remained standing in the same spot. The bucket brigade had dispersed, and most of the neighbors had gone home. Only a few remained, watching to make sure the flames did not spread to the surrounding grassland. The smell of smoke was overwhelming, acrid and bitter, and it stung her eyes and throat. That was when she first saw him. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean build that spoke of hard physical labor. His hat was pulled low over his face, but she could see strong features and eyes that reflected the dying firelight. He was working with a shovel, turning over smoldering debris and dousing it with water from a bucket. Unlike the others who had helped and then left, he continued working methodically, ensuring every ember was extinguished. Martha noticed Julia watching him. "That is Kieran Cole," she said. "He works at the Thompson Ranch. Good man, keeps to himself mostly. Lost his own family some years back, I heard, though he never speaks of it." Julia nodded absently, too exhausted and shocked to care much about the stranger's history. As full darkness fell, Martha insisted again that Julia come to town, and this time Julia agreed, too numb to argue. She cast one last look at the ruins of her home, now just a collection of glowing embers and blackened timber, before allowing Martha to lead her away. She spent that night in the Henderson house, lying awake in their spare bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. She had no home, no possessions except the clothes she wore and the few items in her saddlebag. No money to speak of, as the small amount she kept had been hidden in a tin under a floorboard that no longer existed. She was 28 years old and suddenly had nothing. The next morning, Julia rode back out to her property. In the harsh light of day, the devastation looked even worse. The house was completely gone, reduced to a foundation of stones and a few charred support beams that jutted up like broken bones. The barn was a blackened shell. Everything was covered in a fine layer of ash that the morning breeze stirred into small gray clouds. She dismounted and walked slowly through what had been her home, trying to orient herself. Here was where the kitchen had stood. There was where her bedroom had been. She kicked at the debris with her boot, hoping perhaps to salvage something, anything. She found the twisted remains of her mother's iron skillet, warped from the heat. A few nails. Nothing else recognizable. "Morning, madam." Julia turned sharply. The man from last night, Kieran Cole, stood at the edge of the property, holding his hat in his hands. Up close and in daylight, she could see him more clearly. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and there was a sadness in them that matched something in her own heart. "Good morning," Julia replied, her voice hoarse from smoke and unshed tears. "I wanted to check that the fire was completely out," Kieran said, gesturing toward the ruins. "Sometimes embers can smolder for days." "Thank you," Julia said. "I appreciate your concern." Kieran walked into the debris field, checking areas carefully. Julia watched him, noting how he moved with purpose and efficiency. After satisfying himself that nothing was still burning, he returned to where she stood. "I am sorry for your loss," he said. "A home is more than just walls and a roof." Something about the way he said it made Julia think he truly understood. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Kieran shifted his weight, seeming uncertain. "If you do not mind my asking, what will you do now?" Julia had been asking herself the same question all night. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I will need to find work in town, maybe board with someone until I can save enough money to leave Colorado." "Leave?" Kieran looked surprised. "This is your land, is it not?" "What good is land without a house?" Julia asked bitterly. "I have nothing. I cannot live in the open air through winter." Kieran was quiet for a moment, looking around the property. "It is good land," he said finally. "Near water, somewhat sheltered from the worst winds." "Your father chose well when he settled here." "You knew my father?" "No, madam, but I know land. I can see he knew what he was doing." Julia felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back angrily. She had not cried yet, and she was determined not to start now. Crying would not rebuild her home or bring back her possessions. Kieran cleared his throat. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Vaughn, if you will hear it." Julia looked at him warily. She had learned to be cautious of men bearing propositions. "I am a carpenter by trade," Kieran continued. "Before I came to Colorado, I built houses in Missouri. I have been working at the Thompson Ranch to earn money, but the work there is nearly finished. I could rebuild your house for you." Julia stared at him. "I have no money to pay you." "I know," Kieran said. "I am not asking for money." "Then what are you asking for?" Julia demanded, her wariness increasing. Kieran looked directly at her, those gray eyes steady and sincere. "Nothing but your smile, madam. I have not seen one yet, and I reckon after a fire like this, it might take some time. But when you smile again, that will be payment enough." Julia was so surprised she could not respond for a long moment. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard," she finally said. "Maybe so," Kieran agreed. "But the offer stands. I will rebuild your house. You can help if you want or not. When it is done and you can smile again, we will call it even." "Why would you do this?" Julia asked. "You do not know me." Kieran looked away toward the mountains in the distance. "I know what it is like to lose everything," he said quietly. "And I know what it is like when someone helps you get back on your feet. I am just passing it forward, I suppose." Julia studied him carefully, looking for deception or hidden motives, but she saw none. Just a quiet sincerity that was almost painful in its honesty. "I do not understand you, Mr. Cole," she said. "That is all right," Kieran replied. "You do not have to. You just have to tell me yes or no." Julia looked at the ruins of her home, then back at this strange man who was offering her something that seemed too good to be true. But what choice did she have? She could not rebuild the house herself. She had no money to hire someone, and winter in the Colorado mountains was brutal. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I accept your offer, though I still think you are either foolish or crazy." Kieran smiled then, just a small quirk of his lips, but it softened his whole face. "Probably a bit of both," he admitted. That very day, Kieran began making plans. He borrowed a wagon from the Thompson Ranch and drove into Central City to purchase lumber and supplies. Julia accompanied him, watching in amazement as he haggled with the timber merchant and made a list of everything they would need. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing, measuring and calculating with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. "Where are you getting the money for all this?" Julia asked as they loaded boards onto the wagon. "I have savings," Kieran said. "Been working steady for 5 years and I do not spend much." "This will use all your savings," Julia protested, suddenly feeling guilty. "I cannot let you do that." "Too late," Kieran said. "Already decided. Besides, what else am I going to spend it on? A man can only own so many shirts." Despite her grief and uncertainty, Julia felt the corners of her mouth twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. Over the next few days, Kieran worked from dawn until dusk, clearing away the burned debris and preparing the foundation. Julia worked alongside him, hauling away charred wood and sorting through the ruins for anything salvageable. They found little. A few pieces of her mother's china, cracked but intact. Some tools from the barn that had been far enough from the center of the fire to survive. Her father's pocket watch, its face cracked and its mechanism destroyed, but still recognizable. Julia held the watch in her hand, feeling its weight, and finally let herself cry. Kieran, who had been working nearby, approached quietly. "Was that his?" he asked gently. Julia nodded, unable to speak. "Keep it," Kieran said. "Even broken, it still connects you to him." "Everything else is gone," Julia whispered. "Every picture, every letter, every tangible piece of them." "But not your memories," Kieran said. "Fire cannot touch those." It was a simple thing to say, but it comforted Julia more than any elaborate condolence could have. She wiped her eyes and slipped the watch into her pocket, then returned to work. As they worked together, Julia began to learn about Kieran in small increments. He had been born in Missouri in 1849, making him 33 years old. He had learned carpentry from his father, who had been a master craftsman. He had come west after losing his wife and infant daughter to cholera 7 years prior. He rarely spoke of them, but Julia could see the pain in his eyes when the subject arose. "Is that why you are doing this?" Julia asked one evening as they sat by a small campfire, eating a simple dinner of beans and bread. "Because you understand loss," partly, Kieran admitted, "but also because it needs doing and I can do it. Seems like reason enough to me." "You are a strange man, Kieran Cole." "So I have been told." They fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, Julia would ride out from the Henderson house, where she was still staying, to find Kieran already at work. He had set up a small camp near the property line, sleeping under the stars with just a bedroll and tarp for shelter. Together, they would work until the light failed. Then Julia would return to town while Kieran remained on the property. After a week of clearing and preparation, Kieran began the actual construction. Julia watched in fascination as the new house began to take shape, rising from the ashes of the old one. Kieran worked with a precision and care that spoke of true craftsmanship. Every board was measured twice, every nail driven true. He built the frame strong and solid, designed to withstand the harsh mountain winters. "It will be smaller than your old house," Kieran told her, "but more efficient, easier to heat, easier to maintain." "I do not mind," Julia said. "I was alone in that big house anyway. It felt empty after my parents died." As the walls went up, neighbors from surrounding properties began to stop by, curious about what was happening. Martha Henderson brought food. Old Tom Farrell, who owned the property to the north, donated some extra shingles he had lying around. Even the Thompson family, for whom Kieran had been working, sent over supplies they could spare. "You have good neighbors," Kieran observed. "They care about you." "I suppose I never really noticed," Julia admitted. "I have been so focused on keeping the farm running by myself that I isolated myself without meaning to." "Grief does that sometimes," Kieran said. "Makes you pull inward when you most need to reach outward." Julia realized that Kieran spoke from experience, and she wondered if his isolation was also born of grief. He seemed like a man who had pulled inward and never quite found his way back out. By the end of October, the house had walls and a roof. It was still unfinished inside, but it was weatherproof, which was the most important thing with winter approaching. Kieran built a good chimney and fireplace, using stones salvaged from the old foundation. He constructed shelves and a simple bed frame, a table and 2 chairs. "You should move in," he told Julia. "No sense in imposing on the Hendersons any longer. I can finish the interior work while you are living here." Julia walked through her new home, running her hand along the smooth walls, breathing in the smell of fresh cut lumber. It was smaller than her old house, as Kieran had warned, but it felt solid and safe. The windows were positioned to catch the morning sun, and the fireplace drew beautifully, filling the room with warmth. "It is a good house," she said, and her voice caught. "Better than the old one, if I am being honest." "Your father built with his heart," Kieran said. "I built with experience. Both have their merits." Julia turned to look at him. He was leaning against the door frame, covered in sawdust, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked tired but satisfied, like a man who had done a good day's work. "Why are you really doing this, Kieran?" she asked. "The truth, not the pretty words about my smile." Kieran was quiet for a long moment. "I needed a purpose," he said finally. "After Rachel and Emma died, I wandered for years. I worked, but it was just to survive, not to live. When I saw your house burning, I saw a way to do something that mattered, to build instead of just existing." "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Julia said softly. "It makes perfect sense." She moved into the house the next day, bringing her few possessions with her. Martha had given her some basic necessities, a set of dishes, some blankets, a lamp. Other neighbors contributed what they could spare. Julia set up her new home with a mixture of gratitude and melancholy. Everything was new with no history, no memories attached. It felt strange, like wearing someone else's clothes. But each evening, as she sat by the fire Kieran had built, she felt a small sense of peace growing. This house might not hold her past, but it could hold her future. That thought both frightened and excited her. Kieran continued working on the interior, installing proper floorboards and interior walls. He built cabinets in the kitchen area and a pantry for food storage. He was meticulous in his work, never rushing, always ensuring everything was done correctly. Julia found herself looking forward to each day, not just because her house was taking shape, but because of Kieran's presence. He was unlike any man she had known. He did not fill silence with empty words, but he also knew when conversation was needed. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried weight. One afternoon in early November, as they worked together to install the final interior door, Julia asked him about his wife. What was she like? Rachel. Kieran paused in his work, holding a door hinge. She was gentle, he said slowly. Kind to everyone, even people who did not deserve it. She laughed easily and often. She wanted to see the best in people. She sounds lovely. She was. Kieran resumed his work. Emma looked just like her. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes. She was only 8 months old when the cholera took them both. I am sorry, Julia said inadequately. It was a long time ago, Kieran said, though his voice suggested it still felt like yesterday. I have learned to live with it, though I am not sure I will ever truly get over it. My parents died within days of each other, Julia offered. The influenza swept through so quickly. One moment they were fine, and the next they were burning with fever. I nursed them as best I could, but it was not enough. You did what you could, Kieran said. That is all any of us can do. They worked in companionable silence after that, but Julia felt that something had shifted between them. They had acknowledged their shared understanding of loss, and in doing so had created a deeper connection. By mid-November, the house was essentially finished. Kieran had built it well, and Julia had a home again. She stood outside one morning, looking at it with pride and gratitude. It was a simple structure, just 4 rooms. A main living area with the kitchen, a bedroom, a small storage room, and a separate entrance area to keep out the cold. But it was beautiful in its simplicity and strength. What do you think? Kieran asked, coming to stand beside her. I think you are a miracle worker, Julia said honestly. I never believed this would be possible. All it took was lumber and time, Kieran said modestly. It took more than that, Julia insisted. It took skill and determination and kindness. Kieran looked uncomfortable with the praise. I should get going, he said. The Thompson family has some winter work for me. Julia felt a sudden panic at the thought of him leaving. Wait, she said. We never discussed your payment. I told you what I wanted, Kieran said. Nothing but your smile. I have not smiled yet, Julia pointed out. So by your own terms, the debt remains unpaid. I can wait. What if I never smile again? You will, Kieran said with certainty. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but someday. And when you do, I hope I am there to see it. Julia stepped closer to him. Stay, she said impulsively. The storage room could be made into living quarters. You could live here while you work at the Thompson Ranch. It would save you from camping outside through the winter. Kieran looked surprised. That would not be proper, me living on your property. Since when have you cared about what is proper? Julia challenged. Besides, people already know you built my house. What more can they say? They could say plenty, Kieran replied, and it would damage your reputation. My reputation is my concern, Julia said firmly. Please, Kieran. Let me do this for you. You have given me so much. Let me give you a warm place to sleep through winter. Kieran studied her face and Julia met his gaze steadily. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said, but only until spring. Then I will find other arrangements. Until spring, Julia agreed, though she suspected that neither of them truly believed he would leave. Kieran moved into the storage room that very day. He did not have much to move. His bedroll, a change of clothes, his tools, and a few books. Julia helped him arrange the small space to be more comfortable, and they hung a curtain across the doorway for privacy. That evening, they shared dinner together for the first time in Julia's new home. She had cooked a simple stew, and they ate at the table Kieran had built, by the light of the lamp Martha had given her. It felt domestic and comfortable, and Julia realized with surprise that she was almost happy. As winter settled over Central City, Julia and Kieran fell into a rhythm of daily life. Kieran would leave each morning to work at the Thompson Ranch, and Julia would tend to the property, preparing it for spring planting. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk, gradually learning more about each other. Kieran told her about his childhood in Missouri, about learning carpentry from his father and metalwork from his uncle. He spoke of his brief, happy marriage to Rachel, and how they had planned to have a large family. He described the devastation of losing both wife and child in the span of a week, and how he had fled Missouri because everything there reminded him of what he had lost. Julia told him about growing up on the Colorado property, about her father's dreams during the gold rush, and how he had found more satisfaction in farming than mining. She spoke of her mother's gentle nature and her father's stubborn determination. She described the loneliness of the past 3 years, trying to maintain the farm alone, too proud to ask for help and too afraid to give up the only home she had ever known. "I think we are both stubborn fools," Kieran said one evening, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Probably," Julia agreed. "But at least we are stubborn fools together." The days grew shorter and colder. Snow fell, blanketing everything in white. Julia had stored enough food for winter, and Kieran contributed his wages from the Thompson Ranch to their shared household. They became partners in survival, and something more than partners, though neither spoke of it aloud. December arrived, and with it came Christmas. Julia had not celebrated the holiday since her parents died, but this year felt different. She found herself wanting to mark the occasion, to acknowledge that life continued despite loss. She baked bread and made a special dinner of roasted chicken, a luxury they normally could not afford. She used some of the money from selling eggs in town to buy tobacco for Kieran, knowing he occasionally smoked a pipe in the evenings. Kieran surprised her by carving a small wooden box, perfect for storing precious items. When she opened it on Christmas morning, she found he had lined it with soft fabric and made a special compartment sized exactly for her father's broken pocket watch. "So you will always have a safe place for it," he explained. Julia felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received." They spent the day together, eating good food and sitting by the fire, talking and sometimes just enjoying comfortable silence. As evening fell and Julia prepared to light the lamps, Kieran spoke suddenly. "I have been thinking," he said, "about spring." Julia felt her heart sink. "You want to leave?" "No," Kieran said quickly. "The opposite. I was wondering if you might consider letting me stay permanently. I could help you with the farm, make it productive again. We could be partners, split everything down the middle." "Partners," Julia repeated, trying to understand what he was truly asking. "I know it is not conventional," Kieran continued, "and I know I have no right to ask. But I have been happier these past 2 months than I have been in 7 years. I do not want to lose that." Julia set down the lamp she was holding. "What are you asking me, Kieran?" He met her eyes. "I am asking if I can stay here with you permanently, as your partner in working this land." "Just a partner?" Julia asked softly. Kieran stood and crossed to where she stood. "I am asking for what I think you might be willing to give," he said. "I do not want to presume anything more." Julia reached out and took his hand, the first time they had touched beyond the accidental brush of hands passing tools. His palm was calloused and warm, strong and solid. "What if I am willing to give more than partnership?" she asked. Kieran's eyes widened slightly. "Julia, you have given me back my home," she said. "But more than that, you have given me back hope. You have shown me that life can continue after loss, that new things can grow from ashes. I care about you, Kieran, more than I thought I would ever care about anyone again." I care about you too, Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. But I do not want to rush you into anything. You have been through so much. So have you, Julia pointed out. And yet here you are, willing to take a chance again. Why should I not do the same? Kieran pulled her closer until they were standing inches apart. Are you sure? He asked. Because once I truly let myself love you, I will not be able to stop. I will love you with everything I have, the way I loved Rachel, the way I should love someone. I would expect nothing less, Julia said, and I will love you the same way. Kieran cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite his rough palms. Then I am asking you properly, he said. Julia Vaughn, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and your partner and the person who stands beside you for the rest of our lives? Julia felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight since her parents died. Joy flooded through her, pure and bright and overwhelming, and she smiled. It was not a small smile or a tentative one. It was a full, genuine smile that lit up her entire face, the kind of smile that could not be faked or forced. It came from deep within, from a place that had been dark for so long and was finally seeing light again. Kieran stared at her and his own face transformed. There it is, he whispered. Your smile, it is even more beautiful than I imagined. Then you have been paid, Julia said. No, Kieran said, lowering his head toward hers. This is just the beginning. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Julia kissed him back, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling like she was finally, truly home. They married in January of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the Central City Church with Martha Henderson and the Thompson family as witnesses. Julia wore a dress borrowed from Martha, and Kieran wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly trimmed. They exchanged vows in front of the minister, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. After the ceremony, their neighbors threw them a celebration at the town hall. There was food and music, and for the first time in years, Julia danced. Kieran was not a particularly graceful dancer, but he was enthusiastic, and they laughed together as he spun her around the floor. I think we shocked some people, Julia said as they danced. The fire was only 4 months ago. Let them be shocked, Kieran said. We know what we feel. That is all that matters. That night they returned to their home as husband and wife. Kieran had moved his things from the storage room into the bedroom, and Julia had made the room as welcoming as she could with her limited resources. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that they were together, that they had found each other in the aftermath of loss and built something new. I love you, Kieran said as they lay together that night, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. I never thought I would say those words to anyone again, but I love you, Julia. I love you too, Julia whispered. Thank you for rebuilding more than just my house. Thank you for rebuilding me. We rebuilt each other, Kieran corrected gently. That is what love does. It takes broken pieces and makes them whole. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath, and Julia and Kieran began to prepare the land for planting. Kieran proved to be a good farmer as well as a good carpenter, and together they worked to make the property productive. They planted crops: corn, beans, potatoes, squash. They repaired the chicken coop and purchased new chickens. Kieran built a new barn, smaller than the one that had burned but well constructed. They acquired a milk cow, 2 pigs, and a goat. The farm began to come back to life. As they worked, Julia found herself constantly amazed by her husband. Kieran approached every task with the same quiet competence he had shown when building the house. He was patient and methodical, never rushing, always doing things correctly. But he also had a dry sense of humor that emerged more often now that he was happy, and Julia discovered she loved making him laugh. One day in April, as they worked together in the garden, Julia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not been certain. Now, feeling the subtle changes in her body, she knew. That evening, as they ate dinner, she told him. "Kieran," she said, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from his plate, concern immediately crossing his face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Julia assured him quickly. "Quite the opposite. I am with child." Kieran froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." Kieran set down his fork carefully, as if afraid his hands might not obey him properly. "A baby," he said, his voice wondering. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Julia said, watching his face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. Kieran stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Julia feared he was upset, but then she saw the tears streaming down his face. He crossed to her and dropped to his knees beside her chair, laying his head in her lap. "I never thought I would have this chance again," he said, his voice muffled. "After losing Emma, I thought I would never be a father." Julia stroked his hair, her own tears falling. "You will be a wonderful father," she said. "I have seen how gentle you are, how patient. Our child will be lucky to have you." "We will protect this baby," Kieran said fiercely, raising his head to look at her. "Nothing will happen to this child, I swear it." "We will do our best," Julia said gently. "But Kieran, we cannot control everything. Sometimes bad things happen despite our best efforts." "I know," Kieran said, though Julia could see the fear in his eyes. "But I will do everything in my power to keep you both safe." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Julia continued to work on the farm, though Kieran became increasingly protective, insisting she avoid heavy lifting and rest more often. Dr. Matthews, the physician in Central City, examined her in her 4th month and declared both mother and child healthy. As summer arrived and the crops grew, Julia's belly swelled with new life. She found herself constantly touching her stomach, marveling at the miracle growing inside her. Kieran would often place his hand beside hers, waiting to feel the baby move, his face lighting up with joy when he felt a kick. They spent long evenings discussing names and making plans. Kieran built a cradle from beautiful cherry wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Julia sewed baby clothes from soft fabric she purchased in town, her stitches small and neat like her mother had taught her. "Boy or girl?" Kieran asked one evening as they sat together, Julia knitting and Kieran repairing a harness. "I do not know," Julia said. "I will be happy either way." "What about you?" "Same," Kieran said. "Though I confess the idea of a son to teach carpentry to has its appeal." "And I would love a daughter to teach gardening to," Julia said with a smile. "I suppose we will have to have several children to cover all possibilities." "Several?" Kieran raised an eyebrow. "How many is several?" "At least 3 or 4, Julia said. "I always wanted a large family, but I thought I would never marry." "Why did you think that?" Julia considered the question. "I suppose because I never met anyone I could imagine spending my life with. The men I knew in Central City were either too rough or too boring, and none of them saw me as anything more than a potential housekeeper." "Their loss," Kieran said. "I see you as so much more than that. You are strong and capable and intelligent. You are my partner in every sense of the word." "Is that all you see?" Julia teased. "Well," Kieran said, setting aside the harness and moving to sit beside her, "I also see that you are beautiful, especially now, carrying our child." He kissed her gently, and Julia leaned into him, feeling content and loved and safe. In September, exactly 1 year after the fire, Julia went into labor. It was early morning, and Kieran had just finished the morning chores. Julia felt the first contraction as she was making breakfast, a tightening across her belly that took her breath away. "Kieran," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "I think it is time." Kieran dropped the bucket he was carrying and rushed to her side. "Now, are you certain?" "Quite certain," Julia said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. Kieran helped her to the bedroom and then rode quickly to town to fetch Dr. Matthews and Martha Henderson. By the time they arrived, Julia's contractions were coming regularly, and she was gripping the bedposts, breathing hard. "You are doing wonderfully," Martha said, taking charge with the calm efficiency of a woman who had assisted at many births. "The baby will be here soon." Kieran hovered anxiously until Martha shooed him from the room. "This is women's work," she said firmly. "Go boil water and stay out of the way." The labor lasted through the morning and into the afternoon. Julia had never experienced such pain, but she focused on the knowledge that at the end of it, she would hold her child. She thought of Kieran, pacing outside, probably worrying himself sick. She thought of her parents and wished they could be here to meet their grandchild. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom window, the baby was born. Julia heard the first cry, lusty and strong, and felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "It is a boy, Doctor," Matthews announced, placing the squirming, wailing infant on Julia's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Julia looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and fell instantly, completely in love. He had dark hair like Kieran and a surprisingly strong grip when his tiny fingers closed around hers. "Can Kieran come in?" she asked. Martha opened the door and called for Kieran, who practically ran into the room. He stopped at the sight of Julia holding the baby, his face a mixture of joy and awe and residual fear. "Come meet your son," Julia said softly. Kieran approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. "He is perfect," Kieran whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Kieran nodded, unable to speak. Julia carefully transferred the baby to his father's arms, and Kieran cradled his son with surprising confidence, despite his trembling hands. "Hello, little one," Kieran said softly. "I am your father, and I promise I will take care of you always. I will teach you everything I know, and I will love you with all my heart." The baby stopped crying and seemed to stare up at his father, and Julia felt her heart might burst with love for both of them. "What should we name him?" Kieran asked. They had discussed names but had never settled on one definitively. Now, looking at her son, Julia knew. "William," she said. "After your father. William Cole." Kieran looked at her with such love and gratitude that Julia felt tears spring to her eyes again. "William," he repeated. "That is perfect. My father would have been honored." The next few weeks were an adjustment as Julia and Kieran learned to be parents. William was a good baby, generally content, though he had a healthy appetite and woke often in the night to nurse. Kieran proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with William when he was fussy, changing his diapers without complaint, and singing him soft lullabies in the middle of the night. Julia watched her husband with their son and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. If the fire had not happened, she would never have met Kieran. She would still be alone, managing the farm by herself, surviving but not truly living. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked one evening as they sat together, William asleep in the cradle beside them. "I was thinking about the fire," Julia admitted. "How it destroyed everything, but also how it brought you to me." "I have thought the same thing," Kieran said. "Sometimes terrible things lead to beautiful things. I lost Rachel and Emma and I thought my life was over. But then I found you, and now we have William. I will always mourn my first family, but I am grateful for my second chance." "You think Rachel would approve?" Julia asked. It was a question she had wondered about but never dared to voice. Kieran considered it seriously. "I think she would be happy that I found love again," he said finally. "Rachel was not the jealous type, and she would want me to be happy. She would probably like you very much." "I hope so," Julia said. "I wish I could have known her." "In a way, you do know her," Kieran said. "She shaped who I am. The good parts of me, at least, are partly because of her influence." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep, listening to his soft breathing. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. But inside the house Kieran had built, all was warm and safe and peaceful. The years passed, bringing more blessings. In 1885, Julia gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Julia's mother. Catherine had her mother's green eyes and a sunny disposition that brought joy to everyone who met her. 2 years later, in 1887, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas. Thomas was quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and observant, often content to watch and learn. The farm prospered under Julia and Kieran's joint management. They were both hard workers, and they made a good team. Kieran's carpentry skills proved valuable not just for maintaining their own property, but as a source of additional income. People came from Central City and surrounding areas to hire him for building projects, and his reputation as a skilled craftsman spread. Julia managed the agricultural side of things, expanding the garden and increasing their livestock. She became known for her preserves and baked goods, which she sold in town. She also kept bees and sold honey, which was always in high demand. Their home was often full of laughter and noise. William grew into a serious boy who loved working with wood like his father. Catherine was adventurous and bold, always climbing trees and exploring. Thomas was the peacemaker, gentle and kind, often found reading books or helping his mother in the garden. But it was not all easy. There were hard winters when money was tight, summers when the crops struggled with drought, illnesses that frightened them but were ultimately overcome. Through it all, Julia and Kieran faced challenges together, their partnership and love growing stronger with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1890, Julia and Kieran sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and pink. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed, though Julia could hear them still playing. "You remember when you first came here?" Julia asked. "When you told me you would rebuild my house for nothing but my smile." "Of course I remember," Kieran said. "Best decision I ever made." "Did you know then that we would end up here? Here on this porch with 3 children and a thriving farm?" Kieran smiled. "No, I did not know. I hoped maybe, but I did not dare assume. I just knew that helping you felt right, and that being near you made me feel alive again for the first time in years." "I fell in love with you while you were building the house," Julia confessed. "I did not realize it at first, but looking back I can see it. The way I looked forward to seeing you each morning, the way I felt comforted by your presence. I loved you long before I admitted it to myself." "I loved you from the moment you accepted my offer," Kieran said. "You were so fierce and proud, standing there in the ashes of your home, refusing to be broken. I saw your strength and your resilience, and I wanted to be part of your life." Julia took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You gave me more than a house, Kieran. You gave me a family, a partnership, a love I never thought I would have. You gave me a reason to smile again." "And you gave me the same," Kieran said. "You showed me that it was possible to love again after loss, that opening my heart again would not destroy me but would make me stronger." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. Inside, the children had finally settled down and the house was quiet. "Should we have more children?" Julia asked suddenly. Kieran looked at her in surprise. "You want more? We already have 3. I know, but I love being a mother and you are such a wonderful father. I think we could handle 1 or 2 more. Kieran laughed. You are trying to fill this house with children, are you not? Maybe, Julia admitted with a smile. Is that so terrible? Not terrible at all, Kieran said, pulling her close. If you want more children, then we will have more children. I am happy as long as I have you. In 1892, Julia gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Mary. The twins were identical in appearance but opposite in personality. Sarah was quiet and shy, while Mary was outgoing and talkative. They brought even more chaos and joy to the household. William, now 9, took his role as oldest brother seriously, helping watch his younger siblings and assisting his father with work around the farm. Catherine, at 7, was attending the school in Central City and proving to be an excellent student. Thomas, at 5, was his mother's shadow, always wanting to help in the garden or kitchen. The house that had once seemed adequately sized now felt crowded, so in the summer of 1893, Kieran built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the living area. He worked on it in his spare time, often with William's help, teaching his son the carpentry skills he had learned from his own father. Julia watched her husband and son working together, saw the patient way Kieran taught and the eager way William learned, and felt her heart swell with love and pride. This was what family was supposed to be, generations passing on knowledge and love, building something that would last beyond any one lifetime. As the children grew, Julia and Kieran made sure to tell them the story of how they came together. They did not hide the tragedy of the fire or the fact that Kieran had lost a wife and daughter before meeting Julia. They wanted their children to understand that life included both sorrow and joy, loss and renewal. Your father rebuilt our home, Julia told them. And in doing so, he rebuilt our family. He showed me that even when everything seems lost, hope can survive. That is the most important lesson I can teach you. No matter what happens, there is always a reason to hope. The children absorbed these lessons in different ways. William became serious and responsible, determined to be worthy of his father's legacy. Catherine became fearless, believing she could overcome any obstacle. Thomas became compassionate, always ready to help those in need. The twins, still young, simply knew they were loved and safe. In 1895, Kieran's work as a carpenter had become so sought after that he was able to hire an assistant, a young man from Central City named Peter who showed promise and was eager to learn. This allowed Kieran to spend more time with his family while still maintaining their income. Julia, meanwhile, had become a respected member of the Central City community. She served on the school board and organized community events. She was known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need, never forgetting how the community had helped her after the fire. One autumn day in 1897, 15 years after the fire, Julia stood in the spot where her old house had burned. She had come here to pick wildflowers for the table, and she found herself pausing to reflect on everything that had happened since that devastating day. The land around her was thriving. The crops were healthy, the animals well tended. The house Kieran had built still stood strong, now expanded and filled with the sounds of a large, happy family. In the distance, she could see Kieran and William working in the barn while Catherine helped Thomas with his reading on the porch. The twins were playing some elaborate game that involved running in circles and shrieking with laughter. Julia thought about the woman she had been 15 years ago, watching her entire life burn to ash. That woman had been broken, lost, without hope. She thought about the man who had appeared out of the smoke and ash, offering to rebuild not just her house but her life, asking nothing in return but her smile. And she smiled now, a full, genuine smile that came from deep within her soul. She smiled for the home she had lost and the better one she had gained. She smiled for the parents she still missed but whose memory lived on in her and her children. She smiled for the fire that had destroyed everything but had also led her to Kieran. Most of all, she smiled for the life she had built from those ashes, a life filled with love and family and hope. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran's voice came from behind her. She had not heard him approach. Julia turned to her husband, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. He was older now, his dark hair threaded with silver, lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But his gray eyes were still as steady and kind as they had been that first day, and his hands were still strong and capable. "I was thinking about the fire," Julia said, "and about everything that came after." Kieran put his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" "Not the fire, obviously, but everything that followed. Sometimes I wonder if I pushed you into something you were not ready for." "Never," Julia said firmly. "Not for one single moment have I regretted choosing you, choosing this life. You gave me everything I needed when I had nothing. You showed me how to live again." "We saved each other," Kieran said. "I was just as lost as you were, just in a different way. You gave my life purpose and meaning again. You gave me a family. You gave me joy." They stood together, looking at the thriving farm, listening to their children's laughter. Julia leaned into her husband's solid warmth and felt completely at peace. "You remember what you said the first day we met?" Julia asked. "You said you would rebuild my house for nothing but my smile." "I remember," Kieran said. "And I got what I asked for, did I not? You smile all the time now." "I do," Julia agreed. "But you got so much more than a smile. You got a wife, 5 children, a home, a life. Done not you think I underpaid you?" Kieran laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Your smile was the door that opened to everything else," he said. "That was the payment I asked for, but the true reward was everything that came after. Every morning I wake up next to you, every dinner with our noisy family, every quiet moment on the porch watching the sunset. That is the real payment, and it is worth more than all the gold in Colorado." "I love you," Julia said, the words still feeling as powerful as they had the first time she had spoken them. "I love you too," Kieran replied. "Always have, always will." As they walked back toward the house together, hand in hand, their children saw them and came running. William and Catherine reached them first, followed by Thomas and the twins. They surrounded their parents, talking over each other, asking questions, requesting help with various projects and problems. Julia and Kieran listened patiently, answering questions and settling disputes, guiding and teaching and loving. This was their life now, chaotic, busy, full of responsibilities and challenges, but also full of love and laughter and meaning. That evening, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Julia and Kieran sat together by the fireplace. It was the same fireplace Kieran had built 15 years ago, and it still drew perfectly, filling the room with warmth and light. "Tell me something," Julia said. "If you could go back to that day when my house burned, knowing everything that would happen after, would you still make the same offer? Would you still rebuild my house for nothing but my smile?" Kieran did not hesitate. "I would make the same offer every single time," he said. "In every possible version of that day, I would choose you. I would choose us. I would choose this life." "Good," Julia said, snuggling closer to him. "Because I would choose you too. Every single time." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, each lost in their own thoughts but aware of and comforted by the other's presence. Outside, the Colorado wind whispered through the mountains, the same wind that had fanned the flames 15 years ago. But now it only brought the promise of changing seasons, the turn from fall to winter, the endless cycle of renewal and growth. As the years continued to pass, the Cole family became an integral part of Central City's community. William grew into a talented carpenter like his father and took over much of the business, allowing Kieran to semi-retire and spend more time with the younger children. In 1902, at age 19, William married a local girl named Emily. And in 1903, he made Julia and Kieran grandparents for the first time with the birth of their grandson, James. Catherine attended Teachers College in Denver and returned to Central City to teach at the school she had once attended as a student. Thomas studied agriculture and implemented new farming techniques on the family property, increasing their productivity. Sarah became a talented seamstress, while Mary followed her mother's footsteps in beekeeping and preserves. In 1905, Julia and Kieran celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary. They had been married for more than 2 decades, and their love had only deepened with time. The passion of their early years had mellowed into something even more profound, a partnership built on trust, respect, mutual admiration, and deep, abiding love. On their anniversary, Kieran took Julia back to the spot where her house had burned, where he had first made his offer to rebuild. The area was now part of the expanded garden, planted with roses and wildflowers. "You remember standing here?" Kieran asked. "You were so proud, refusing to cry, determined not to break." "I remember," Julia said. "I remember thinking my life was over, that I had lost everything that mattered." "But you had not lost everything," Kieran said. "You still had yourself, your strength, your resilience, and you still had your future, even though you could not see it yet." "I had you too," Julia said. "I just did not know it yet." Kieran pulled a small box from his pocket. "I never gave you a proper engagement ring," he said. "We married so quickly, and we had no money to spare, but I have been saving, and I wanted to give you this." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. It was not ostentatious or expensive, but it was chosen with love and care. "Kieran," Julia breathed, tears filling her eyes. "It is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Kieran said, and though the words were simple, even cliched, the sincerity in his voice made them profound. He slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the plain gold band she had worn for 22 years. Julia looked at her hand, at the 2 rings that now adorned it, and felt overwhelmed with emotion. "You have given me everything," she said. "A home, a family, a life filled with love. I do not need a diamond to know how much you love me." "I know," Kieran said, "but I wanted to give it to you anyway. You deserve beautiful things, Julia. You deserve everything good this world has to offer." They embraced, standing in the garden that had grown from ashes, surrounded by the beauty they had created together. In the distance, they could hear their children and grandchildren at the house, the sounds of family and life continuing. "We did well, did we not?" Julia said. "From the ashes, we built something beautiful." "We did," Kieran agreed. "And it all started with a fire, a desperate woman, and a cowboy with a hammer and some lumber." "And a smile," Julia reminded him. "Do not forget the smile." "How could I forget?" Kieran said. "That smile changed everything." By 1910, Kieran was 61 years old and Julia was 56. They were grandparents to 7 children, with more expected. Their farm was thriving, managed primarily by Thomas and his new wife. William's carpentry business had expanded to employ 5 workers. Catherine was the head teacher at the Central City School. The twins had both married and started their own families. Julia and Kieran had officially retired, though they still helped around the farm and with the grandchildren. They spent their days in quieter pursuits. Kieran doing small woodworking projects for pleasure rather than profit. Julia tending her beloved garden and writing down family recipes and stories for future generations. One spring morning, as they sat on their porch watching the sunrise, Kieran said, "I have been thinking about legacy." "What about it?" Julia asked, sipping her coffee. "When we are gone, what will people remember about us? What will our children and grandchildren tell their children?" Julia considered the question. "I hope they will remember that we loved each other and them, that we built something good from tragedy, that we faced hardships but never let them break us." "I hope they remember that kindness matters," Kieran added. "That's sometimes the best thing you can do is help someone who has nothing, expecting nothing in return. That is what I tried to do for you, and look what came of it." "They will remember," Julia assured him. "We have told them the stories so many times. They know about the fire and how you rebuilt the house. They know that our love story started in ashes." "It is a good story," Kieran said with satisfaction. "Better than I ever could have imagined." "The best stories are the ones we live," Julia said, "and ours has been a very good story indeed." They sat in comfortable silence, as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. They held hands, their fingers intertwined, and in that simple touch was contained all the love, trust, and partnership of nearly 3 decades together. Life continued its inevitable march. There were births and deaths, joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Through it all, Julia and Kieran remained the steady center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1918, Kieran fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. At 69, his body could not fight the illness as it once might have. Julia nursed him devotedly, rarely leaving his side, but even her love and care could not hold back the inevitable. On a cold February morning, with Julia holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed, Kieran spoke his final words. "Julia," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "building that house for you was the best thing I ever did. Every moment with you has been a gift." "Do not go," Julia pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot do this without you." "Yes, you can," Kieran said. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived before me and you will survive after me." "But I do not want to survive," Julia said. "I want to live, and I cannot live without you." "You will live," Kieran insisted. "For our children and grandchildren, for the farm. For the life we built together. Promise me." "I promise," Julia whispered, though her heart was breaking. Kieran smiled then one last time. "There is that smile I love," he said. "Remember, Julia, I asked for nothing but your smile, and you gave me a lifetime of joy. I love you, always." "Always," Julia echoed. Kieran closed his eyes and, with Julia's hand in his, passed peacefully from life. Julia kept her promise. Though she mourned Kieran deeply, she did not let grief consume her as it might have done in her younger years. She knew Kieran would want her to continue living fully, embracing joy as well as sorrow. She remained on the farm, now surrounded by her grown children and numerous grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about how he had rebuilt her house and her life, about the love they had shared. She wanted them to understand that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that kindness mattered, that from ashes, beautiful things could grow. Julia lived another 12 years after Kieran's death. She saw her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren born. She watched the farm continue to prosper under her children's care. She maintained her garden until the very end, finding peace and purpose in nurturing growing things. In the spring of 1930, Julia passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. She was buried next to Kieran in the Central City Cemetery, under a simple stone that read, "Julia Cole, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." She smiled and the world became brighter. The house Kieran had built stood for generations, sheltering his descendants through decades of change and growth. The farm remained in the family, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own improvements while respecting the foundation that had been laid. The story of how Kieran had rebuilt Julia's house for nothing but her smile became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It became a touchstone for the family's values, that love conquers tragedy, that kindness costs nothing but returns everything, that from the worst devastation, new life can bloom. In 1950, William's grandson, now an old man himself, stood on the property and told the story to his own grandchildren. "Your great-great-grandfather lost his first family to disease," he said. "Your great-great-grandmother lost everything in a fire. They found each other in their darkest moments and built a life together. They showed us that love is not just about the happy times. It is about standing together when everything falls apart, about rebuilding when everything is lost, about finding reasons to smile even when the world seems determined to make you cry." The children listened, wide-eyed, as they always did when hearing the story. It was more than just family history. It was a lesson in resilience, in hope, in the transformative power of love and kindness. The house still stands today, though it has been modified and expanded over the years. If you visit Central City, Colorado, and know where to look, you can still see it, sturdy and strong, a testament to the cowboy who built it with his own hands and the woman who learned to smile again within its walls. But the true legacy of Julia and Kieran is not in wood and stone. It is in the generations of descendants who carry their story in their hearts, who understand that love can heal, that kindness matters, that from the ashes of loss, something beautiful can grow. It is in every act of generosity done expecting nothing in return, in every smile given freely in the face of hardship, in every hand extended to help someone who has lost everything. The fire of 1882 destroyed a house, but from those ashes rose a love story for the ages. A cowboy with a hammer and a dream, a woman with nothing but her pride and resilience and a simple request, nothing but your smile. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything, and Julia did smile. She smiled through joy and sorrow, through birth and death, through triumph and tragedy. She smiled when Kieran first kissed her, when she held each of her children for the first time, when her grandchildren played in the garden, when she was old and gray and looking back on a life well lived. That smile, freely given, was worth more than gold, more than any payment could ever be. In the end, Kieran had been right. He had asked for nothing but her smile, and in return he had received everything that truly mattered: love, family, purpose, joy, and a life filled with meaning. Julia had given him her smile, and he had given her the world. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope survives. That even when everything burns to ash, new growth can emerge. That love, freely given and honestly earned, can transform lives and heal wounds we thought would never close. That sometimes, the most valuable things in life cannot be measured in money or possessions, but in smiles and kindness and the willingness to help someone who has lost everything, expecting nothing in return. The house Kieran built was made of wood and nails and labor, but the home he created was built of love and trust and partnership. That home, invisible but indestructible, sheltered not just Julia and their children, but generations that followed. It stands still in the hearts of their descendants, a warm and welcoming place where love always wins, where kindness is never wasted, and where, no matter how dark things seem, there is always a reason to smile. This is the story of Julia and Kieran, of a fire that destroyed everything and a cowboy who rebuilt more than just a house. It is a story of love born from ashes, of hope surviving devastation, of two broken people who found each other and became whole. It is a reminder that the best things in life often come from the worst moments, that tragedy can lead to triumph, and that sometimes all it takes to change a life is a willingness to help, a steady pair of hands, and a request for nothing but a smile. And Julia smiled. Through 50 years of marriage, through raising 5 children, through the joys and sorrows of life, through everything that came after that devastating September day in 1882, Julia smiled. It was the smile that Kieran had asked for, the payment he had requested. But it was also so much more. It was proof that the human spirit can endure, that love can conquer loss, that from the ashes of our worst moments, our best selves can emerge. The story ends where it began, with ashes and hope, with loss and renewal, with a woman who had nothing and a man who gave her everything, asking for nothing but her smile in return. It is a simple story, but the best stories often are. It is a love story, but it is also a story about resilience, about kindness, about the incredible things that can happen when one person decides to help another, expecting nothing in return. Julia lost everything in a fire. Kieran rebuilt her home and asked nothing but her smile. She gave him that smile and so much more, and together, they built a life that became a legacy, a love that transcended tragedy, and a home that stands not just in Central City, Colorado, but in the hearts of everyone who hears their story and understands its message. That love heals, that kindness matters, and that even from the darkest ashes, the brightest hope can rise.